Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Commuti. I look after technology and innovation for Trane Technologies, and I'm excited to be moderating this panel on opening back better. Certainly a timely topic, and I'm thrilled to have Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester here with us, and David Terry, who's the president of the National Association of State Energy Officials. Just to kind of run down the run of the show here, I'll kick off with a couple of opening framing observations. I'm going to turn the floor over to the Congresswoman, followed by David, and then we'll have a conversation about opening back. And so I'd like to just start off with a few observations. I think it couldn't be a more timely topic for us to be discussing at EE Global. First, obviously, in the news, there's a lot going on with regard to building back our infrastructure and American competitiveness, and clearly the bill addresses that topic. And we're coming off really a second point, which is an incredible set of winter weather, which stressed the resiliency of our infrastructure, and right ahead of us actually is the time of the year where a lot of people's thoughts really move to the resiliency of our built environment and of the electric grid, with what we've experienced the last several years with increasing weather events related to hurricanes and also wildfires. Thirdly, and not to be lost, is the reopening of spaces, and so really being considerate of reopening, retail, entertainment, shared venue spaces in a safe way, which in a lot of cases provides some headwinds for the efficiency goals. And then probably the last point, but not nearly the least, is the U.S. really reasserting its leadership in the climate change arena and the solutions in technology and innovation related to that. And so, the hard work that the Congresswoman and her colleague have put into the act in order to be able to think about kind of a holistic approach on how to really open back better really is the backdrop of our conversation today. And so with that, I really wanted to turn it over to Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, who represents Delaware in the U.S. House of Representatives. She sits on the House Committee for Energy and Commerce, which I think most of you know has broad jurisdiction over health, environment, commerce, and trade. The Congresswoman, prior to joining Congress in 2016, served in the cabinet of two governors as the Secretary of Labor and the State Personnel Director. If we had extra time today, Representative, I'd love to hear about how you run HR for the state of Delaware. That's an interesting opportunity. She graduated with an undergraduate degree in international relations at Fairleigh Dickinson and has a master's in urban affairs and public policy from the University of Delaware, and we're thrilled to have her with us today. So just to get things started, maybe you could take a moment and let us know how you took up these general ideas and really have led to the introduction of the legislation in Congress.
Well, first of all, Paul, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And yes, there are many stories I could tell about HR in state government in the state of Delaware, and that would be a much longer program. And I want to also thank the Alliance to Save Energy and your president, Paula Glover, a fellow Delaware Blue Hen, for inviting me to be a part of this important discussion on the Open Back Better Act at the Energy Efficiency Global Forum. And a special recognition and thank you to the Alliance for your leadership and support for the Open Back Better Act. Your expertise on energy efficiency and energy financing was truly invaluable during the drafting process. And so I want to thank the Alliance for your ongoing work and advocacy for a more energy efficient nation. And it's also good to be with my fellow panelist, David Terry. The National Association of State Energy Officials has been an important advocate and partner on this bill. And I was really excited to have the state perspective, especially me coming from state government and having that connection and knowing that the real action, the real work happens on the ground, and it happens at the local level. And that really is the thing that informs how we make good policy at a federal level. So thank you so much for highlighting our Building Back Better with your theme of building back brighter. We have an opportunity to create a brighter future for everyone. And our bill would ensure that our nation's critical infrastructure, like hospitals and schools, are more resilient, more energy efficient, safer, and more reliable to guard against future threats while creating good paying jobs. And as you mentioned, I was labor secretary as well as head of state personnel, so jobs are important to me. And then prioritizing communities that are hit hardest by those threats as well as the pandemic. Transitioning to cleaner and more energy efficient future is not only necessary to protect human health and the environment, but it's also an enormous opportunity to create a more equitable economy. We know that this transition will not be easy or without challenges, but we also know that this transition can help create good paying jobs, again, in a cleaner, healthier, and safer economy. So Open Back Better for us is about all of those things. And I'm proud of the partnership that I've formed with organizations such as yours to also build back brighter and better. Both ultimately for me, it's about the health and the wealth of people. It's about partnerships between government, the private sector, and nonprofits. And bottom line, it's about our planet. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
That's great. Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn now to David Terry. David's been with the National Association of State Energy Officials for about 25 years, working on a range of energy issues, both on the energy efficiency and on the supply side. I was joking with David before we got started today that normally when I think about the state energy officials, I think of 50. I think there are 56 state energy officials that you represent, including represented territories. So I'll have to keep that number. But David, I was hoping that you would be able to comment on really, what's the state perspective on opening back better?
Thanks, Paul, and really echoing some of Congresswoman Blunt Rochester's comments, a big thank you to Paula Glover and the entire ASA team. They've been an amazing partner and supporter and leader in the Open Back Better Act activities, along with others, and we appreciate that partnership at the state level. And I think in particular, the Congresswoman's leadership on energy policy and a range of energy issues that all of us care about. And that's really exemplified in the Open Back Better Act, and we just appreciate her engagement and willingness to work with us as well. From a NASEO perspective, as you noted, we represent all of the governor-designated energy directors, states, territories, District of Columbia, and they have their hands full with a lot of exciting opportunities. We have a convergence of electrification opportunities, building efficiency, manufacturing, grid innovation, renewables, et cetera. It's a tall order, but in their work responding to governors primarily, jobs, life, health, safety are always top of list. And I think one of the things that attracted us to the Open Back Better Act is how they bring so many of these pieces together. They're really foundational elements of the Open Back Better Act and foundational elements of the state energy offices. Just to elaborate on that a little bit, the energy offices have been engaged in energy emergency preparedness and response, among their many other duties, for decades, going back to the oil shortages of the late 70s and 80s. And as we've had increasing numbers of emergencies resulting from extreme weather, climate-driven events, whether it's hurricane or flooding, extreme cold snaps, you name it, we've really had to focus on building resilience in our communities. And those states that have been faced with more disasters, Florida is an example, certainly preparing for hurricanes, That's really resonated, and they've worked hard to harden electric infrastructure, of course, but also to work on facilities. Our member in Florida has added a modest solar and storage to almost 100 schools that serve as shelters to provide basic electrical services. This is an example, and there are many other states that have similar examples in one way or another: Maryland, Massachusetts, Tennessee, Wisconsin, Washington State, that are taking similar steps. But the need is overwhelming, and I think the events that we see every year, the recent cold snap in the central Southwest affecting so many people, this is lives and livelihood. And I think what we know after study after study after study is that resilience combined with efficiency, which often makes the resilience less expensive to implement, pays off in benefits, not only in life-saving, but in returning people and returning economies back to work sooner. It makes sense in almost every economic study we've seen. And we're just thrilled to see Congresswoman Blunt Rochester and Senator Smith from Minnesota lead this effort and make these ideas a reality through the Open Back Better Act. It just makes sense.
Congresswoman, you had mentioned in your remarks that the equity issue, really, that this legislation, like a lot, requires that 40% of the investment is happening in low income or environmental justice communities. I'm wondering really how important that is to you and to the administration, and probably how do we ensure that is actually where the investment flows?
Well, first of all, it kind of takes me back to the first question that you asked about, what got me into this. Basically, that was the question: what inspired me to be focused on this in Congress? And, I look back through sort of the trajectory of even the jobs that I've had. Jobs is important. So a part of this is about jobs. Another piece of this is that Delaware is the lowest lying state in the country. And so we feel the impacts of climate action or climate change real time. And so it's important for us, whether it's our beaches or whether it's our farms, there are those issues that are also important to me. But your question about why it's so important that we focus these resources in these areas is because we know that for generations, inequalities and injustices have disproportionately been the burden of low wealth communities and communities of color. And so one of my other former jobs was as CEO of the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League in Delaware, where we again focused on justice issues. And so, part of the goal here, and it's also a goal of the administration, when they talk about Build Back Better, or when we talk about Open Back Better, we look at the fact that we've got roads and bridges and infrastructure that's outdated, but we've also got buildings that are outdated. And many of them are in communities that were resourced from the beginning. And so that's one of the reasons why it's an area of target. Even in the pandemic, what we saw was that, the racial and income disparities. We saw the number of hospitalizations, the contraction of COVID, and the deaths were disproportionate in those communities. And so to me, what is so special about this is that it is a win-win-win. Again, when we talk about jobs, we also are talking about the health outcomes of individuals that live in those communities or go to those schools or those public facilities. And so that's one of the reasons. It's areas that have historically been underinvested in. And we believe that it's really important. If we're going to build back better, if we're going to open back better, if it's going to be a brighter open back, then it needs to be equitable as well.
That's great. And is this in conflict, David, at all at the state level?
No, incredibly synergistic. And I wish we had come to it sooner. About 3 years ago, a number of NASEO members came to us and talked about their frustration about how do they get their hands around beginning to address these inequities from an energy policy perspective at the state level. And so much of the infrastructure as Congresswoman Blunt Rochester noted, is in the communities that have been underserved and underinvested in and impacted by that infrastructure, on top of all the other issues that are present. So we formed an equity task force, which later became a committee about 3 years ago, to begin to think about what does that look like? How do we implement that in state policy? How can states think about these issues? With regard to the Open Back Better Act, and I think it's really unfortunate, there aren't many silver linings in COVID, but it made us really come to grips with this, is bringing together these resources in a way that benefits the entire community as well as those underserved communities by meeting those needs and preparing. We've assembled our equity committee, our buildings committee, and our energy security committee, all led by state energy directors with different expertise, to begin to assess what's needed in those communities from a resilience perspective, mission critical facilities, how might they go about planning for that in their own communities. We hope we're doing that with resources that are complemented with federal resources such as the Open Back Better Act, but it's important and it's our intention to move forward with that. So it's really a perfect fit. And I should add, when we were even having in-person meetings before COVID, these meetings around equity and the issues that we're trying to really move forward on at NASEO were standing room only. People care about this, they're interested in it from virtually every state in the country. Just one last comment. NASEO has been fortunate to be involved with research conducted by our members, the Energy Futures Initiative and BW Research, about the opportunities to upgrade buildings. It's really ubiquitous, and to help create high paying jobs in underserved communities. This is win-win is a great way to phrase it. It's probably more than that, but I think it's just the right time, the right place, and the right issue, and certainly jobs and community well-being and health is at the center of this.
You know, Paul, I thought of one other thing. I mean, the more we talk about it, the more we can probably think of in terms of the benefits, but just even the work that you are all doing in terms of energy efficiency across the board. I remember on our Energy and Commerce committees, I serve on both the Environment and Climate Change Subcommittee, and I'm also on the Energy Subcommittee. And I remember a conversation about just the importance of energy efficiency in general for our country, and how the idea of it lowering costs. I mean, if you can lower the cost of somebody's energy, their bills, right now I've got to buy a new stackable washer and dryer. And, what am I looking for? I'm looking for energy efficiency. Like, it's drilled into my system now. And so I think that that's another reason why it is important, because we are also not just looking at, can we build a new building, but can we create opportunity? And as was said, I think that's the part that hopefully we will be able to turn, the challenges of this moment into some real opportunities for a better future.
That's great. Well, you had me excited there for a minute when you said you needed. I was hoping you were going to say air conditioning for your home, but
well, that's a whole
stackable washers. Story. I guess we can go. We'll have to. I've
been dealing with an air conditioning issue as well, so yeah, that's a whole nother story.
We could take that offline.
Yeah.
I think there's something. I'm going to come back to the climate topic for a minute, because the interplay and kind of the roles and responsibilities between the federal government and the state governments in terms of policy frameworks has really changed a lot. If you just go back a few years here, right? That with a void, if you will, in federal leadership on these topics, right? A lot of the states have jumped into the game and really started to think about how to incent, building back the right way, right? And so I'm curious, probably from both of you, like, is there a deadlock in the way that we think about that? Right now, there's going to be a set of federal policy and sort of the framework for how we should be building back that could potentially be in conflict with some of the climate-related decarbonization pathways that the states have been working on. How aligned are we? And, is that going to create friction in the system?
I'll let David go with that one
Oh,
first.
happy to. Yeah, I think I don't think so. I think we'll see more and more synergy. I mean, in the last several years, we've seen states certainly step up on economy-wide climate actions, but they've been engaged in that for decades, starting with renewable electricity standards, energy efficiency standards, and so forth. So efficiency in particular has been a part of that conversation for a long time. And I think one of the changes that we saw really 2 or 3 years ago is nearly all the states getting engaged in this conversation about what to do about climate. It's being led by corporations, non-energy and energy alike. We have states with major oil and gas resources that are talking directly with their corporations about how they reduce their carbon footprint and impact. And I think the important thing is to recognize there are different ways to get to that, depending upon the resource mix, the state, et cetera. But I do think provided flexibility on federal policy actions, federal energy actions that allow states and companies to really lead and innovate, but set expectations and goals is the way we get there. And I think that's where the synergy comes in with regard to rebuilding. And I think the energy efficiency and convergence of great low carbon technologies that are really leading the charge for how we operate the country in a more productive way. Again, I think this, paraphrasing the president is probably the best thing I could do, I guess, on climate action is that it means job creation. If we let state, local, private action bloom with that, I think that synergy will happen.
And I would just add that I agree. I think that number one, in the beginning, I talked a little bit about why this is important for the people, how it is important for the planet. But I do believe that partnerships are really vital in this. And I think, as David said, in the absence of us having this real national synergy from the federal level, the states and cities and businesses, I mean, we've had presentations by cement manufacturers that have come in to talk to us from ports who have talked to us about the things that they are doing. And what I can say is that I feel in the last Congress, we basically laid the groundwork for climate action. I mean, Representative Kathy Castor led such an incredibly diverse and massive effort to look at a framework, a groundwork, a foundation. And now in this Congress, with this administration, you're seeing real climate action. And I think so those pieces were sort of primed, and now is the time for all of us to pull these pieces together to make it have real impact. And I think the pandemic, just like, I started a bipartisan future of work caucus in the Congress, and what we thought was that it was going to be automation and machine learning and autonomous vehicles, but it really was the pandemic that pushed the future of work with distance learning, telehealth, telework, just like it is pushing us to not only get into climate action, but also to see it from an equitable lens, because this past year has been so clear and stark in some of the challenges that we have historically faced. So I think we're ready, we're primed.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I'll just give you my opinion about kind of the opportunity that having the states and the federal government working together is. It gives us at least 50, maybe 56, David, areas of innovation, right? So we can experiment, we can try different things, and we can find out the best solutions to that. The next question, so while we're on this, for the audience, if you want to ask a question, I think that you know how to put that into the platform, and we'll be taking those questions from the audience here shortly. And while we're waiting on that, I'm just going to jump into another one. So, I'll be a little bit direct on this, I guess, which is I was in a presentation recently, and we were kind of reviewing all the infrastructure-related ideas that are bubbling up in Washington right now. And there was a footnote on the slide that said to the nearest 5 billion. And I said, I think that might be the first time that I've ever seen a financial presentation that said to the nearest 5 billion. And what that highlighted for me is the amount of investment that we're discussing and enacting right now is at levels really that are higher levels than we've ever seen before. And so the question is, I think maybe for both of you in the different contexts, are there lessons that we learn from other things that we've invested in on how to make sure that we get the investment to the place that it needs to go? We've talked about equity, we've talked about efficiency, resiliency, so are there ways of thinking about how to get the investment to where it needs to go? And also to come back and think about, are we getting the outcomes that we wanted from the investment? I'm just curious how we think about that. I mean, it's a very corporate way to think about measuring outcomes.
No, I think that's an incredible question. I think it's very important, especially in the past 12 months where we've had to invest so much in I'll break it down into 3 buckets, and the recovery, the restoration, and the restoration. So for me, all that we had to invest in the recovery, whether it was the vaccines, whether it was the testing, whether it was, dealing with that pandemic, that was significant and substantial amounts of money that went to states and local governments. The same is true with the American Rescue Plan. And so, I feel as one of our roles as members of Congress is it's not just to legislate and appropriate, but it's also accountability and ensuring that the dollars go where they need to. And I think one of the big discussions that we're having now, even as part of an infrastructure plan, is about how do you pay for things? So there's the how do you pay for them? And then there's the how do you monitor and make sure that they're going to the right places? I'm fortunate. I live in Delaware. So Delaware is very small. I literally called up my state treasurer. I called up our OPM director. I looked at the numbers and where they're going. And actually, so we have those kind of relationships in Delaware where we can actually do that. You can't do that everywhere. But I do feel as members of Congress, we have a fiduciary responsibility, as well as the agencies. And again, coming from a state agency, I also know that a lot of what we got, even in terms of how to advise the federal government, like the Treasury Department, was from the state. I got the information from them. So I do think that there is a place for that, as well as, making sure that we are able to rebuild in a way that makes sense and actually prepares us as we move toward the future. So David probably has a different slant or a different take on it, but I do feel it is important not just to appropriate the money, but also to make sure that we're accountable for where it goes.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I know all of our members do. Their roles in state government and the transparency and the work that they do, it is I would say second nature to them to really proceed that way. And we've had a lot of conversations about that internally at NASEO among the states about infrastructure needs. We had recommendations around infrastructure that we provided to Congress and the administration a year or so ago, and I think in all of those cases, we quickly were reminded, for example, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that then Vice President Biden had such an important role in leading. And the kind of transparency and accountability we saw there, I think, was extraordinary, at least with regard to the money that flowed through the states, the state energy offices in particular. We had essentially no cases of fraud or abuse. Every case, I think, of good impact, good stories. We did after actions about what went right and wrong with it. And I think the difference now, and some of the differences that make your question even more relevant, and some of the comments about outcomes, states are taking a more comprehensive look at energy generally, and particularly the energy offices. They cut across all the silos and sectors that we see in the energy space and have to think about what part is private sector, what part is public sector, what part for a disadvantaged community needs more investment and response. So they're thinking in those ways. And I think the other piece of this that's different from say a decade or more ago when that investment was conducted, we have greater capacity, I think, at least among the state energy office at the state level to manage these funds, certainly. But we also have, I think, a better sense of planning. During ARA, there was an understandable, incredible rush to get the money deployed, spent, jobs created. The states are still in a hurry, but I think as the president has laid out, at least in his approach to a jobs bill, an infrastructure bill, he's thinking about stage gating and funds and a multi-year process that allows for some strategic planning and thought. And the energy offices are already engaged in those plans and thoughts. We have most states having some kind of plan in place, and everybody looking at this through the lens of whether it's the Open Back Better bill or related activities in EV infrastructure, et cetera. So I think that outcome orientation is welcome. And I think the time, a modest amount of time to help put that on paper and put it in place and put those transparency pieces in order so that we can be measured, I think will be welcomed by the states and certainly by the governors.
And, I want to follow up on what David also said about the transparency piece, because I think even in this last year with the CARES dollars that went out, the ability for members of Congress to have kind of an oversight committee that was looking at where the dollars went, the ability for us to in real time get feedback on something like the PPP loans and say, you know what, this money was intended to go to those smaller businesses, those minority-owned businesses, and we got to regroup. And so in the next package, we reevaluated, retargeted the money, and I think that is very different than maybe in the past. It could be the fact that we have technology. It could be the fact that we have the real-time internet. But I think that those are lessons we've learned in just the past year to make sure that the money gets to what it was intended to take care of.
I agree. I think the feedback loop is so much better, and I all those things. I don't know if it's technology or expectation, but we embrace it.
Yeah.
Well, we certainly live in a real time, pretty transparent world right now. So,
Yes.
And I really appreciate your comments that the feedback loop was pretty short, right?
Yeah.
Even if you don't get it right, you have that transparency, you know what's happening, and you're able to correct on it.
That continuous quality improvement. That continuous quality improvement. Just keep.
Yeah, I mean the one thing, along the lines of how do you get the money where it is. I mean, it's been just an observation, that particularly this resiliency issue, right? I mean, when these adverse events hit, you go kind of down Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, right? I mean, immediately now you need the power back on, you need safe water, you need places for people to seek shelter. And if you don't have a plan going into that, it's not likely that you're going to get something better in an emergency after an emergency. And, I'm just wondering if some of the investment, it's okay to have a plan, right? And so I don't know if there's a question in there or just a comment. It's something that I've spent a fair amount of time figuring out. The one thing I do like about the Build Back Better Act is really kind of stimulating the private investment alongside the public investment. And I was wondering if maybe you could. How important is that to the success of the legislation overall?
I think that's one of the reasons why I said partnership is so key. Inherent in this is also the question of, where are we as a country in terms of our belief that we need to do something, and what having that private sector component to it, I think, also shows the broad, just the broad need, as well as the broad support for doing this kind of work. I mean, we were fortunate that we were able to get the Open Back Better bill in both the Clean Future Act as well as the Lift America Act. And that was really important to us because we wanted to make sure that, in any possible way we can get this passed, we're going to try to get this passed. And so any vehicle that's out there. But the reality is that the federal government, our investment helps to spur the private sector and the private investment. It's a symbiotic relationship. And that's really, sort of what our goal is. And it shows that we are serious about also helping the business sector save money as well. So really, and improve efficiency as well. I mean, I think about the connectivity, like even here in our own state, that when we have one of these extreme weather situations, it's not just stopping the government, it is also impacting our business community as well. And then also, like I said, the investment together, I think, is really, really vital. And we haven't really talked about this, but I think even for some of my Republican colleagues, I've been in office. This is my third term. I had never run for anything before. I ran for Congress. That's the only thing I've ever, first time, 2016. And I've even seen the change and the growth and the conversations about climate action in my committee. And I think by having a bill like this that realizes and focuses on our infrastructure, that focuses on our competitiveness, even as a country, and looks at that private sector connection, I think that also helps to get, the support that we need as well. So I think back to the win-win of all of this, it truly is.
And I would just add, I think it's a central point. Public-private financing of mission-critical public facilities is as lead by example for government as you can get. The benefits, I think, are hopefully obvious. Retrofits and upgrades of lighting and HVAC and on-site power, backup power, the efficiency components that allow those systems to be cheaper to implement to begin with. We see, a variety of mechanisms. Our members run any number of financing programs, revolving loan funds, but also use energy savings performance contracting frequently, using the energy savings to pay for the efficiency components, and then being able to have additional capital, hopefully federal capital, state capital, private capital for resilience elements, whether that's hurricane-proof windows or elevation of equipment, whatever it may be. I think that public-private component is just such a sort of uniquely American approach that has a lot of appeal, lowers the cost to taxpayers, allows for government, I think, to do what it does best, the private sector to do what they do best. And I think the kind of guidance that we see in the Open Back Better Act to address underserved communities, for example, or allow states the flexibility to really prioritize what those mission critical facilities are in partnership with the local governments. And I guess just one maybe last note on that, for several decades, the Congress on a bipartisan basis has supported the U.S. state energy program, which has allowed for a lot of innovative financing mechanisms and testing. Some of that was around public-private financing and performance contracting that actually began in the state and local sector with the help of programs like that, and then spread to the federal government, which does an extraordinary job in this area. And I think, I really think this lead by example aspect and paying attention to all communities and the innovation element of this to bring in new technologies will open additional markets. So I think it's the right direction, and why this has such strong support from all of our members across the country. It's in the interest of every state.
Yeah, there's a lot of wins in there. So there's one topic. I think it's probably the elephant in this conversation. No political innuendo intended. The politics of Washington right now, and Congresswoman Blunt Rochester, a Delawarean, we all believe that you probably have some unique insight now into what's happening in the executive branch, and you can tell us exactly how this gets done. But I'm wondering if you could maybe share with us how you see this playing out, and will we be able to get this over the line?
Well, I can say that I might have a unique perspective, but I don't have a crystal ball or a magic wand. So I will tell you, I think like most people, there's this realization that infrastructure must get done. It was vital pre-COVID. It is probably even more important now post, and we can't even say post. We are still in the middle of a pandemic. And so, but what I can say is folks call me a pragmatic optimist because I am optimistic, but I also know that the realities of life. And so right now, I think what people can watch out for is the conversations that are happening. The White House is trying to work on a bipartisan plan As we all know, the gulf between what the Republican Senate and Republican members are proposing is much greater than what the Democratic House has proposed. And so herein, what it's my understanding is that between now and Memorial Day, we will see where the negotiations take us. I am, like I said, very, very hopeful that we will see an infrastructure bill, and I am, hoping that it will be part of the American Jobs Act. We've got the American Family Plan as well. Our bill, like I mentioned, is part of the Lift America Act and the Clean Future Act, and we are very, very optimistic and hopeful that it will pass. The folks that work on my team know my word for this year is impact. How can we have the greatest amount of impact for the greatest number of people in the most positive way? To me, open back better is a way to open back brighter.
Great. David, what are the states going to do to make that happen?
That we're speaking up already. We find a lot of areas of agreement around the energy proposals in the President's Jobs bill. Not every state agrees with every part, but I think the Open Back Better Act is an example of almost unanimous agreement about the good sense of that approach and a number of the other elements of the jobs bill. And so we have members reaching out from both parties. We are a bipartisan organization to our core, but representing red states, blue states, and everybody in between, reaching out, having conversations with congressional offices and staff in their own states and at the national level. And so we're hopeful, optimistic, and I like Congresswoman Blunt Rochester's description of, I think, a pragmatic optimist. I think that's a great way to think, and we are certainly as well. We have strong agreement among the states about the needs that are out there, and infrastructure, frankly, was at the top of our list for the last several years. So we're thrilled that it's moving forward in some fashion, and hope we can help it move along the way.
That's great. So I'm looking at the clock. We only had one comment that came in that we haven't talked about, which is really, a lot of the rebuild and kind of build back part of what we're talking about focuses a lot on equipment. And I think it was more of a comment than a question, just that the maintenance of the equipment and sort of what, for the Alliance itself, sort of the digital overlay, which I know is important to how these systems come together for active efficiency and whatnot, are really an important part of what we do. And so, it's not only that we have to, part of building back better, if you will, or opening back better, is also to make sure that these systems are connected, communicating, maintained over their long life cycle, as this infrastructure that we build is long-lived in the environment. So, look, I'm going to go back around the horn here, David. I thought it was some really great insights into the legislation. I think it's very pragmatically. You both have talked about win-win-win. I think where I started with 4 elements, it might be a win-win-win-win. But however we take it is good. David, maybe you could wrap up from your point of view. Anything that we overlooked or should consider before I give the last word to the member of Congress?
Sure. Just really quick and briefly, I think going back to your notion and question about planning and preparing, and I think thinking strategically, whether it's digital technologies for grid interactive efficiency, something NASEO members are working on with utilities and with the Department of Energy's Building Technology Office, or whether it's electric systems, et cetera, incorporating these new technologies, planning quickly, but strategically to bring this together for resilience, I think is the ultimate win for not only taxpayers, but just all Americans and residents of our states. So this is the right thing to do and the right act, and hope people that are in the audience today will reach out and help us spread that message and work with their own delegations.
Great. And Congresswoman Blunt Rochester, I'm really bummed out you're not in North Carolina, is all I can tell you. That's my takeaway from this today. We really appreciate your leadership, and I would leave it to you for the last word.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate the Alliance, NASEO, your leadership, and to help us push this. We are talking about historic investments in our country. And for me, doing it also in an equitable way. As I said, it's for the people, it's for our partnerships, it's for our planet. And I am just honored to be a part of this and look forward to working with you to get it across the finish line. You mentioned, Paul, about wishing I was from North Carolina. I could tell you my daughter graduated from Winston-Salem State University, so did my dad, my sister and nephew from North Carolina A&T with the Aggie Pride and the engineers. And it is that thought that all of us are connected. You know, our families, our country, and in this moment, the reason why I have a bipartisan Future Work Caucus is because, to me, these are issues we need to come together on, work together on, so that we can all be lifted. And I am just excited. I am ready. Let's make this happen. Let's make this happen for America.
That is where we'll leave it. Let's make this happen. So thank you both. Really appreciate it today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.